I found her sitting on my porch steps at 2 in the morning, soaked to the bone, whispering her name over and over like it was the only word she had left. I didn't know her. I didn't know the name either. I just stood there in my doorway with the porch light buzzing above us, watching a stranger fall apart on the same wooden steps I'd walked across every day for 6 years, and something in me refused to go back inside and pretend I hadn't seen her. It was raining hard enough that the gutters had given up. She had her knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around them, hair plastered flat against her face, and she was rocking just slightly, saying the same word into her own arms, so quietly I had to lean down to catch it. It sounded like a name. Eli, she said like it hurt to say, and hurt more not to. I asked if she was okay, which is a stupid thing to ask a crying stranger on your porch at 2 in the morning. But it's what came out. She looked up at me, and for a second, I swear the whole street went silent, the rain included. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was something underneath the crying that looked almost like recognition, like she was trying to place my face against some memory she couldn't quite reach. Then she blinked, and whatever was disappeared, and she just said, "I'm sorry, wrong house," and started to get up on legs that clearly weren't going to hold her. I caught her arm before she went down the steps. I told her she wasn't going anywhere in this weather, that I had a couch and a kettle, and absolutely no intention of watching a stranger walk into a thunderstorm at 2 a.m., because she was too polite to admit she needed help. She laughed at that, this small broken laugh that didn't match the tears at all, and let me bring her inside. But to understand why that laugh hit me the way it did, I have to take you back to a summer that happened a long time before that night, back before I was the man standing in that doorway, back when I was 17 and didn't know yet that the people who leave the deepest marks on you are rarely the ones who stay. That summer, I lived 3 streets over from a girl who used to sit on the curb outside her house reading paperbacks with cracked spines, and I used to walk past her on my way to my summer job just to see which book she'd be holding that day. We weren't friends, not really. We were the kind of almost strangers who gnawed at each other and privately hoped the other one notices. I only spoke to her once that whole summer, the night her father's heart gave out at the dinner table and the ambulance lights turned her whole street red and blue. She was sitting on somebody's porch steps then, too, shaking, alone, because her mother had gone in the ambulance and nobody had thought to stay with the girl. I sat down next to her, without asking. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say much of anything. I just stayed until the sun came up, and at some point she put her head on my shoulder, and I put my arm around her, and right before dawn she turned and kissed me, quick and clumsy and full of grief, like she needed to feel something that wasn't lost. Then her aunt came to get her, and 2 weeks later a moving truck pulled up outside her house, and I never saw her again. I didn't even know her last name. All I had was a first name and a summer that ended too fast. Back in my kitchen, years later, I handed the woman from my porch a towel and a mug of tea she didn't drink, and I watched her hand shake around the ceramic like she was trying to remember how to hold something without breaking it. She told me her name was Mara. She told me she'd had a bad year, a breakup that ended badly, a job that let her go over video call, a father whose death anniversary had quietly passed 3 days earlier without her telling a single person. She said she'd been driving with no destination, just needing to move, and somehow she'd ended up on my street, on my porch, without remembering deciding to come here at all. I didn't push about the name. Not that first night. I gave her the couch, a blanket, and my number in case she needed a ride somewhere in the morning, and I told myself that was the end of it. One strange, rainy encounter I'd think about for a week and then forget. She texted 3 days later to thank me. I told her she didn't need to, and she wrote back that she wanted anyway, and somehow that turned into coffee, which turned into her showing up at my door on a Thursday with takeout, because she said she owed me a meal that wasn't just tea, which turned into a habit neither of us named out loud. She had this way of going quiet mid-sentence when something got close to the truth, like a door swinging halfway open and stopping itself. I noticed it and didn't mention it, because I was doing the same thing, dancing around a story I hadn't told anyone in years, the story of a girl in a porch and a name I'd never said out loud since that summer. There was a particular Tuesday I still think about, weeks into whatever we were becoming, when she fell asleep on my couch with her shoes still on and a half-eaten container of noodles balanced on her knee, and I sat in the armchair across from her, just watch her breathe for longer than I'd ever admit out loud. I remember thinking that I hadn't felt this kind of quiet happiness in years, the kind that scares you a little because you know exactly how much it would hurt to lose it. I almost woke her up right then to tell her about the porch, about the summer, about the girl with the paperbacks. I got as far as saying her name once, softly, and she stirred but didn't wake, and I lost my nerve and let the moment pass. I told myself there would be another chance. I didn't know yet how close I'd come to never getting one. 3 weeks in, we were sitting on my actual porch, the one where I'd found her, and she went quiet in that particular way again, staring at the top step like it meant something to her. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "And you won't think I'm insane?" I told her I already thought she was a little insane in the best way, and she smiled for the first time all night. "This house," she said, "have you always lived here?" I told her no. I bought it 8 years ago from an estate sale, an older couple who'd owned it for decades before selling it off in pieces. I didn't think much of the question. She nodded slowly, like she was matching something up in her head, and then she asked if I'd grown up in this neighborhood. And I said yes, 3 streets over, and something crossed her face that I couldn't read yet, gone before I could ask about it. I want to tell you, I figured it out that night. I didn't. I was too busy noticing the way she started leaning her head on my shoulder when we sat outside, too busy noticing that I'd started saving the last of anything good, the last cookie, the last hour of daylight, the last good seat, for whenever she showed up next. I was falling for a woman with a locked door somewhere behind her ribs, and I told myself I could love her without ever needing the key. That worked for a while, until the night I heard her say the name in her sleep for the first time. We'd fallen asleep on the couch after a movie, her head on my chest, and somewhere around 3 in the morning she murmured it again, clear as anything, right against my collarbone. "Eli." I lay there in the dark, completely still, and every insecure thought I'd been holding at arm's length walked straight into the room and sat down. I assumed the worst, the way people do when they're half asleep and fully in love and terrified of losing something they've only just found. I assumed there was a man somewhere, an ex she wasn't over, a wound she was keeping from me on purpose. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I almost ended it before it had a real chance to begin. I told her, carefully, that I needed to know who Eli was before this went any further, that I couldn't keep pretending I didn't notice, that I deserved at least that much honesty if she wanted me to keep showing up. I watched something shudder behind her eyes, that same half-open door swinging close again, and for a terrible few seconds I thought I'd push her out the door for good. And then she said something I wasn't ready for. "If I tell you," she said quietly, "you have to promise you won't look at me differently. It's not what you think. It's not a person I dated. It's not even someone I really know. It's just a name I hold on to when everything else falls apart, and I don't fully understand it myself. So I need you to be patient with me until I do." I promised her I would be. I meant it. I had no idea how close that promise would come to explaining itself. That promise held for a while. It got tested the night she had too much wine at a friend's birthday and called me to come get her, and in the car, half asleep against the window, she murmured that name again. "Eli." Soft, almost tender, like she was apologizing to it. I gripped the wheel and reminded her, as gently as I could, that she'd said someday she'd be ready to explain it properly. She went stiff, suddenly very awake. "Not tonight," she said. "Please. I promise I will be. I just need it to make sense to me first, before I hand it to you and watch your face change." I told her I wasn't going anywhere, and I meant it, but something in me had started to hum with a suspicion I wasn't ready to look directly at, the way you avoid looking at the sun even when you can feel it on your face. 2 weeks after that, she finally told me the whole story, unprompted, on a night when the rain had come back, and we were sitting exactly where we'd started, on my porch steps, like the house itself kept pulling us back to the beginning. She told me about a summer, when she was 17, about a father who died mid-sentence at a dinner table, about sitting on a stranger's porch steps, alone, until a boy she barely knew sat down beside her and didn't leave until the sun came up, about how he never said much, but somehow said everything, just by staying, about a kiss she gave him out of grief and desperation, and a moving truck 2 weeks later that ended it before it began. She said she never learned his last name. She said she used to whisper his first name to herself in bad moments for years afterward, Not because she was still in love with a boy from one summer, but because that night had become the measuring stick for every moment of comfort she'd had since, and none of them had ever matched it. She said his name had become shorthand for the feeling of being safe. His name was Eli, she said, staring at her hands. I know it's ridiculous. I know it's been years. I don't even know why I still say it. I didn't say anything for a long moment. The rain kept falling. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and went quiet. I felt something rearranging itself in my chest, slow and enormous, like furniture being moved in a room I thought was already fully arranged. Mara, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it to. What was your street called before you moved? She told me. It was my street. The one 3 over from where I used to live. The one I'd walk down every single day that summer just to see which book she was reading. What was your father's name? I asked, already knowing, already feeling the ground tilt. She said it. I closed my eyes. Mara, I said again, quieter this time, I'm Eli. She didn't say anything at all. She just looked at me the way you look at something you've been staring at your whole life, without realizing what it was. And her hand came up slowly to cover her mouth, and I watched a decade of unspoken things move behind her eyes all at once. That's not possible, she whispered. But she was already crying, and this time it wasn't the broken kind of crying from the night I found her. It was something closer to relief, the kind that comes when a wound you've carried so long finally gets to close. I sat with you that night, I said. I never told anyone about it either. 2 weeks later you were gone, and I didn't even know your last name to look for you. I used to think about that porch a lot. I didn't know it would end up being mine. You bought a house on a street you used to walk down just to see me, she said, half question, half disbelief. I bought a house I liked, in a neighborhood that felt like home for reasons I never let myself examine too closely. I said, I think some part of me has been circling back to that night for years without admitting it. She laughed then, wet and disbelieving, and pressed both hands over her face like she needed a second to hold herself together. I drove here without deciding to, she said through her fingers. I don't even remember choosing this street. My hands just brought me here. Maybe they remember before you did. I said. She lowered her hands and looked at me, really looked at me, in a way she hadn't allowed herself to since the night I found her crying on these same steps. I've been saying your name for 10 years, she said, and I never once let myself hope I'd say it to your face again. I reached over and took her hand, the same way I had that first night so long ago, except this time neither of us was 17, and neither of us was pretending the moment meant less than it did. You don't have to whisper it anymore, I said. I'm right here. She didn't say anything back. Neither did I. We just sat there on that same porch, in the same rain, a decade apart from where it started, and somehow exactly where we were always supposed to end up. And for the first time since I found her crying on my steps, the silence between us didn't feel like something broken. It felt like something finally, quietly, whole. It's been a few months since that night, and Mara still comes up the same steps almost every evening, except now she doesn't hesitate on the bottom one the way she used to, like some part of her was always bracing to be turned away. We talk about that summer sometimes, piecing together the parts we never told anyone, comparing memories the way you compare two halves of photograph that have been torn apart for 10 years and finally taped back together. She says she used to think she'd invented the comfort of that night, exaggerated it in her memory, because she needed something to hold on to after her father died. I tell her she didn't invent anything. I remember it exactly the way she does, down to the sound the porch swing made, and the color of the sky turned right before sunrise. She doesn't whisper the name into her arms anymore when things get hard. She says out loud now, straight to my face, like a person's name is supposed to be said, not like a wound. You're pressing on to make sure it still hurts. Sometimes she still says it quietly, almost like a habit, but there's nothing broken in it anymore. It just sounds like she's glad I'm in the room. If you've ever loved someone before you had the words for it, and lost them before you got the chance to try, you already know what it felt like to hear her say my name for the first time in 10 years. You don't forget a feeling like that. You just wait, without knowing you're waiting, for the day it finds its way back to your porch. Last week she asked me, half joking, what would have happened if I hadn't opened that door the night she showed up crying. I told her the truth. I said some part of me had been listening for her footsteps for 10 years without knowing it, and I would have opened that door for her at 2 in the morning, in the rain, for the rest of my life, until she finally came home. She didn't answer that one. She just leaned her head on my shoulder, the same way she had on a different porch a decade before. And we sat there together until the porch light clicked off on its timer, and neither of us moved to turn it back on. We didn't need it. We already knew exactly where we were.